Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to today's first story, about how OP's brother defamed him after getting fame and success. So OP destroyed his entire career by exposing him in a live TV interview. Now story. Ever since my brother and I were kids, we dreamed of becoming actors. My kids, I mean when he was a kid I was way older. My little brother was born a whole 13 years after me, so I was more like his dad than his brother. Our mom and dad died in an accident when I was 18 and he was 5, so I raised him and went through hell with him. I didn't go to college, of course, and had to keep working. I took him to school, studied for him, took him to the doctor when he was sick, helped him when he was going through stuff, and was there for him every step of his entire life. The only thing that I had hoped was that one day, he would repay that favor. Because we lived alone for so long, we had to bond, and for us that was movies, almost every day. We would put on a movie to watch and it drove us closer. Maybe I just needed the escapism factor of it all, but I did enjoy these simple moments between us. Our favorite movie was It's a Wonderful Life. Every year, we would sit down to watch it. I always resonated with that movie because just like George Bailey, I felt like I didn't get to do what I wanted in life, but that I had bigger responsibilities that drove me away from those goals. I often imagine just the ending where George thinks he died, and the whole town is for the worse without him. I imagined that my little brother may not have had a good life if I weren't there, and that made things much better. Then, I had enough money to put my brother through college, even though it was something I never had the luxury of doing. It was hard having him away, but I understood that this was the best case. He decided to lean heavily into drama and become the actor that both of us had always dreamed of becoming. I supported him wholeheartedly and wanted to see him reach the highest places. I also realized that I now had 4 whole years to myself and that I could start focusing on myself and getting to do what I loved. I felt like my role towards my brother was finally over. These 4 years were much different, though. I had the house for myself, but I felt so lonely. It took me a while to get used to the idea of my brother not being around, and everyone told me that I needed to find my own life and maybe get married and have kids. I found that so difficult, as I completely ignored that aspect of my life for so long. Every time I thought I might try, something would just pull me away. On holidays, my brother would come to visit me, but he seemed different. For some reason, he lived college life a bit too much, and he was changing. Each time he would visit, I would recognize him less and less. It seemed like he would forget some key memories every time I would remind him. We didn't have much family left, so it would always just be me and him on holidays, but they felt distant. During his 4th year, he told me that he landed this theater gig doing Shakespeare. I was so happy for him and saw that he was finally on the right path. The play was in a different city, so I had to drive a good 4 hours to go see it. I kept calling him when I arrived, but he wouldn't pick up. I assumed that he was just busy in rehearsals, so I got my ticket and took my seat. The play was absolutely wonderful, and he played an amazing Macbeth. I was so excited to see him up on stage, and even more excited when he grabbed the mic to send some thanks at the end. I was waiting for him to thank me or acknowledge anything about me, but he kept thanking his castmates, director, and school, and that was it. I was a little bit disappointed, but I thought that maybe he just got caught up in the moment and forgot. After the play, I met him backstage and told him how much I loved the play. I was excited to spend some time with him to discuss, but he was in such a hurry and told me that he had to go out with his friends. He was being even more distant and barely let me get a whole sentence in or even a hug. I thought that it was just his age, and because I never went to college, I didn't know that maybe that was just the way the students are when they get their freedom and independence for the first time. That night, I drove home alone even though we were supposed to meet for breakfast in the morning. I thought he wouldn't even notice, and I was right. The next day, I didn't get a call for breakfast or anything. I knew that his priorities had shifted, so I got the hint and decided to take my distance. After finishing school, I thought that he would finally come home, but he didn't. He called me and told me that he would be staying in Los Angeles, as he had found an agent and would start getting some small roles. Even though the entire year he barely even called me, I was still happy for him and told him I would visit several times throughout the year. This meant, though, that I was finally on my own and could pursue anything I wanted. I didn't know what to do, but I felt like my brother wouldn't be involved anymore. For a year, I saw my brother in various commercials on TV. I was happy to see him every time, but I wasn't happy when he didn't return my calls, which was very often. I would tell people I know that that was my brother and they'd ask why we weren't meeting. The thing is, my brother seemed to be completely overtaken by that life. In the times when he did answer, he would hang up quickly because he was busy and tell me to rain check. It was bad until Thanksgiving when it was bad. I expected him to come like every year, but he didn't show up and didn't even answer my calls. I left him a million messages and he replied 2 days later telling me that he got held up because he had something to shoot. At that moment, I decided it wasn't worth calling him anymore. A few months after that, I saw an ad for a big TV show about some fantasy genre. My brother was going to be in that show and I couldn't believe it. It was a huge break. This was the moment he hit it big. Still, a part of me didn't even want to congratulate him and I didn't. I couldn't believe that he wouldn't at least text me with that news. I felt like my life was just at a standstill, so I decided to change things up. I met a girl and soon enough, we were married. Even though I was almost 40, I was finally happy and settled. My wife would often ask me about my brother, but I'd be coy about it and tell her that we're not that close. She didn't even know he was the now famous actor. The show finally premiered and it was a massive hit. I saw my brother's face in every YouTube ad, on every billboard, and it was the talk of the century. I saw him doing several interviews to promote the show, but most of them were about the show itself and less about his personal life. This was until the one moment that broke my heart. I sat down one evening to watch The Tonight Show with my wife and saw my brother on as the first guest. I still couldn't believe how far he had come, but my wife still had no idea he was my brother. I can't blame her, since he didn't even bother to show up for my wedding when I sent him the invitation. The show was going well enough until the host finally asked him about his personal life, upbringing, and how he got to where he was. I was on the edge of my seat and expected to finally get some credit, since he can't tell his life story without mentioning me. Of course, I was dead wrong. My brother told everyone how he grew up poor and miserable without a mother or father, how he struggled in every aspect of his childhood and teenage years, and how he felt lonely without parents and wanted someone to talk to. My jaw was on the floor. He didn't even mention me at all, except quickly saying that he had an older brother who lived with him. When the host asked about the brother, which is me, he brushed it off and said that we weren't close, and more like roommates. The host went on about he couldn't believe that he had a brother and still felt this lonely and miserable, and my brother did not do a single thing to defend me or tell the truth. I was furious, and my wife saw me getting angrier and asked me what was wrong. I told her that this was my brother and she was genuinely shocked. At the end of the interview, he said that he's glad the dark days are behind him and that his fans are his real family. I was just so confused, but at that moment, I knew where my brother stood and what he thought about me. I called him 23 times that night and he didn't pick up, so I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I was too furious and I needed answers. I knew that he was staying in a nearby city, so I left my wife at home and drove 6 hours to get to where he was and to his hotel. I told the receptionist that he was my brother and that I needed to see him, but of course, she didn't believe me. I kept demanding and causing a scene until I coincidentally saw him leaving the elevator and ran up to him. His security grabbed me instantly and he asked me what I wanted. I yelled and asked him how he can do this and say this, and he told me that he told the truth. He told me that he saw that I was jealous of him since both of us had that actor dream when we were young. He told me that as a child, all he cared about was money and he hated how we lived so modestly. I asked him how he can ignore all the good things I did for him, and he told me that I just did my responsibility as anyone in my position should and that I did nothing special for him. I was getting more and more furious and in the end, he told his security to throw me outside. The brother I knew was gone. This was someone else entirely and I had to show him his place and give him a lesson he would never forget. I knew that the lives of these Hollywood stars are made hell by paparazzi, so I just hired one, told him where my brother lived, and watched the internet blow up. The paparazzi followed him everywhere, taking extremely unflattering photos of him right outside his house and even through the window. It wasn't enough, so I simply leaked his address online. It got so bad and he was swarmed by both paparazzi and fans every day that he had to move to a place I didn't know. Next, I had another trick up my sleeve. I contacted TMZ with some inside source reports that my brother texted underage girls. This wasn't true, but the internet ate it up without any reputable source. Soon enough, people started posting these fake conversations with him online, claiming that he had tried to talk to them when they were only 16. It was crazy how much the internet wanted to believe anything, and how people went along with any story without any proof. This caused headlines for a whole week, and it must have been a PR nightmare. He and his team kept denying these allegations, but once you get quote-unquote cancelled on the internet, even if you did nothing, you can't go back. One interesting thing that I heard about was that my brother suddenly invested a large sum of money into this washed-up Italian restaurant in our town. The restaurant was extremely unpopular, and I had only one theory of why he'd be pouring so much money into something impossible to get him any money. I called up an accountant friend of mine, and he started investigating this. By the end of his research, he told me that the only reason someone would invest so much money in some beat-down restaurant was for money laundering. I didn't want to believe it, but I remembered that this wasn't my brother anymore. We filed a report about the restaurant, and soon enough, auditing and the police started investigating it. This was right in the middle of my brother's fake scandal, so as soon as the police confirmed that illegal money laundering activities were going on in that restaurant, it got shut down and they started investigating who the people behind the money were. Right as my friend got back to me with the info, I called my brother and he surprisingly picked up for once. He asked me what I wanted, and I told him that I knew he was in a lot of trouble and that he can come to stay over where he can get away from all of this craziness. He took it as a surprise and told me that he would be coming over. He fell right into my trap. A couple of days later, he arrived at my house. We sat down for dinner and I asked him all about what was happening. He didn't even apologize for the things he said about me, and just sat down frantically. I kept telling him that what he did was wrong, but that he should tell me the whole story. Eventually, he cracked and told me everything. He told me that Hollywood life had taken over him and that he couldn't resist all the pleasures of it. He told me that he got deep into drugs and sex trafficking, which many rich and celebrities were doing. I wasn't surprised about the drugs, but the sex trafficking caught me off guard. He told me that he owed people money and that he had to launder all of that money he made. So he invested in that restaurant because he thought nobody would ever recognize it since we used to go there when we were kids. He couldn't believe that the restaurant was caught and kept wondering who did it. He told me about so much dirty business he got into and I kept pretending that I was being sympathetic. But he didn't feel sorry for any of it. He just talked about it out of venting, without showing an ounce of guilt. Once he was over, I cracked a smile that he was confused about. All of a sudden, a bunch of cameramen and reporters burst out of the rooms. It was live TV, and they had recorded everything. I called them earlier, hoping that my brother would be willing to share. We had 3 cameras in the house and he started throwing a fit. His breakdown and confession to crimes were broadcast to millions of viewers all over the world, and I couldn't be happier. He tried to run, but I grabbed him and locked him in the basement until the police arrived. One of the reporters interviewed me, and I told them the whole story. I told them how he lied in that one Tonight Show interview and that I had done everything for him, only for him to completely neglect all of that for fame, fortune, and a sob story for the audience. I told the world that my brother was an ungrateful liar, and a couple of days later, after he had already been taken into custody for the crimes he confessed to, I started getting an insane amount of calls and emails asking me to do interviews, tell more stories, and even write a book about the whole thing. In a twisted way, I had become more famous than him for being the brother who took revenge on his brother, and we became the talk of the month. A part of me felt sad for my brother, but he needed to go through all of this to learn gratitude and respect. He got a reduced sentence, likely because of his connections, but he still got some prison time. I decided not to visit him once, so when he gets out, he feels the sense of being neglected and forgotten. People may have different opinion about this story, but I believe OP's brother lied about him in the interview to generate sympathy and boost his fan following. Also, I really felt bad for OP, but I think he had way higher expectations from his entitled brother. Now here is the end of our first story, and I hope you guys are enjoying my daily content. And let me know what's your opinion about OP and his brother. Also, do you think OP is jealous of his brother's fame? Comment your opinion below. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories. Now, moving to our final story, in which OP's company doesn't want to pay him what he is worth, so OP took his revenge and the company ends up losing millions of dollars. Now story. So years ago, I was working for a laboratory that did a lot of testing for the military. It was a terrible job for several reasons. Despite having enormous responsibility, they never gave me credit for anything. In meetings with the department head, they frequently blamed me for problems that they had caused. But I had solved and they could not. They also hired consultants to come in and tell me I was wrong only to have the consultants say I was right. And the consultants would get paid a quarter of my yearly salary for one day's worth of work. I only stayed as long as I did because it was my first real job and I honestly didn't know better. But before I left, by their own standards, I was severely underpaid. HR agreed it. They claimed there was nothing that could be done. Meanwhile, other people were given off-schedule raises. Well, I wasn't the only one that was underpaid. There were several others as well, but none of them were critical to the operation of the laboratory. Eventually, the DH went to the director with a list of all the underpaid people. I found out that my name was on the top of the list as the most underpaid person, not surprising. Using this list, the DH got permission from the director for one-time raises. An announcement was made. Well, guess who didn't get a raise? This even though I had made massive improvements in some of their processes that easily saved them millions per year. And their budget was just over $10 million. I was livid. I had enough and decided to leave. They hired 2 people to replace me at more than double my salary. One of them had just graduated 2 weeks before. From what I understand, they had a lot of difficulties. That would have been enough for most people and maybe even for me for most of my life. But it wasn't enough for me then. I wanted revenge for what they had done to me. So, I arranged a meeting with one of the project managers from the Department of the Military that we had done our tests. I casually mentioned to him that I had left my old job. He was shocked. Remember how I said they never gave me credit for anything? Well, the military PMs considered me an invaluable expert and could not understand why the lab had driven me away. They immediately pulled several $1 million worth of work from the lab and gave it to the competition because they had no confidence that the lab could do the work anymore. When I ran into one of the lab managers, the only half-decent guy there, I casually mentioned my meeting with the PM and I could tell he figured out how the military knew I had left. It took them years to recover, and honestly, I don't know if they ever really did. The last time I checked their webpage, it hadn't been updated in at least 12 years. I would have been happy with a $20K raise, ecstatic even, but they weren't willing to spend $20,000 and lost $2 million to start and more in the long run. I started my own business and now make at least 5 times what I would if I had stayed there until now, and more than 10 times what I was making when I left. Now, here is the end of our today's video. I hope you are enjoying my content. Guys, let me know your opinion about this story, or how you would deal with such situation in the comments section. And before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.